Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. Today will be a special video as we jump into the time machine and travel back a whole 26 years to the year 1999 as we take a look at this fun looking action figure from Hasbro. We are featuring the DC Superheroes Batman. Highly articulated, display stand included. Alright, so during the 1990s, late 1990s, I was fresh out of college and I was still collecting toys and comic books. An action figure like this really hits home for me. I'm so fond of action figures from the late 90s and early 2000s. Anytime I see any of these like older Hasbro, Kenner superhero figures, I immediately think of like my old KB Toys store that was in my local mall, and I just remember, going there with my buddy, and then we'd always be checking out the toy aisle looking for new Star Wars figures. And KB, they were always so plentiful in like stuff like the Toy Biz Marvel action figures, or like the Hasbro / Kenner DC action figures. Whether it was like the Batman line or Total Justice. These DC superhero figures were nice because they were a larger scale, and they kind of felt like they were like a response to like the trends during that time period. Toy companies like McFarlane and Toy Biz, they were making larger, more premium style action figures, and something like this, it kind of felt more aimed at the collector than like kids, especially with it coming with a display base. And then this kind of facsimile of a comic book cover, which you cut out and set as the action figure's backdrop. You have a nice short bio here on Batman, the fake comic book cover for the backdrop. And let's take the figure out. Alright, we have the Dark Knight himself, Batman, and here's the display base. The display base is kind of cool. It kind of like recreates a rooftop, with the windows on the top of the ceiling. And then there's a slot here on the back. So what you do is you cut out this comic book cover here, and then you place it onto the back of the display base like that. And it kind of gives you a neat backdrop to display your action figure against. As for Batman himself, very interesting figure. This is what was probably considered a premium action figure by Hasbro's standards during the late 90s. Granted, they did have some larger scale DC superheroes like Legends of the Dark Knight. But this one, it's nice. It's very different than some of their other toys. And for whatever reason, I've said this before in some other videos, during the late 90s, the flesh tones were very pale and almost like anemic, and they don't photograph or videograph very well, so it's kind of hard to make out his facial details. The shade of blue and gray, it's really nice. It's very comic book inspired. And my first thought looking at this, it kind of reminds me of the Batman that we saw in the video game Justice League Task Force. The emblem is kind of weird because his the sculpting on his musculature, it's very ripped, and I kind of feel like the Batman emblem's placed too low on his chest because it kind of falls beneath his pectoral muscles, and kind of falls. He kind of gets lost in the chest cavity, and I kind of feel like that's because of the cape, which is this kind of loosely fitted onto his head. As you can see here, the cape's not permanently attached by any means. It's just looped over his head like that. And it's just not very tight. Kind of just wobbles around, which is unfortunate because I do have this Superman figure. And the Superman figure actually has these tiny little pegs that plug into the back of his into the back of the figure, affixing the cape a little bit more permanent in place. The figure stands in, if I had to guess, maybe 6.5 inches. And yeah, it's about 6.5 inches, 6 3/4 if you count the horns. For a size comparison, here he is next to a modern Marvel Legends figure. We have the X-Men character Vulcan. We have an older Mattel Christian Bale Dark Knight Batman, part of Mattel's Movie Master line. This is one of my favorite Batman figures. We have a modern Batman figure coming out of McFarlane Toys in their DC Multiverse line, and you can see how much of a beast it is next to the older Hasbro figure. As for the old Batman Hasbro figure from the DC Superheroes line, his head swivels left and right. His arms, kind of an odd articulation choice. It's pre-posed, but it just swivels. I've said this before about a lot of action figures in the 90s, especially the ones that were focused more towards collectors. It feels like these toys were almost like miniature statues, where they're probably sculpted as a statue, and the articulation was probably an afterthought. And then they'd probably cut into the statue and just try to figure out how the figure was going to move, which is the case here because this seems kind of like very random. And same here, you know, this one, it doesn't really bend, it just twists, which is kind of odd. So you don't really get any interesting poses out of it. He does swivel at the waist, and then he has articulated legs, which are kind of stuck on my figure, and I don't want to force it because of its age. And then he does have a knee bend right there. And like I mentioned earlier, I do have the Superman figure, and let me grab that real quick. This is also from the same line, from Hasbro's DC Superheroes from the 1990s. Like I said earlier, the cape is different on the Superman. He has 2 pegs which slot into the back. It's somewhat better than the Batman one, but again, it's not perfect. It kind of floats around. But here we go. We have the world's finest, and it's kind of interesting because both figures seem to be leaning toward their right. It would have been nice if they were kind of like this propped up, standing straight, or at least propped up in opposite directions. But yeah, these figures definitely feel like a product of the 90s, and for me, I love having them in my collection. Very nostalgic at this point in my life for these older action figures and this kind of like dated style. You know, these figures can't hold a candle to like the action figures that are produced today. You know, the stuff that's produced today is this off the charts. You know, the detailing and engineering and articulation and the paint application, they're like just so perfect. But there's just something about these older action figures that just, for me, it's just like coming back home. You know what I mean? All right, so with that being said, let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.